Well, the ANC concluded its policy conference this week with no major shifts in policies being announced. Policy recommendations will go to the December elective conference, and historically elective conferences ultimately vote to adopt those policies of whoever wins the day. But there are a few notable recommendations that investors will keep their eyes on. Dr. Azar Jammine is the chief economist with Econometrics. We'll try and get his view on what came out of this conference. Dr. Jammine, as always, thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Devin.
All right, so, I mean, as we said, investors couldn't have really expected major policy shifts coming out of this conference. But at the same time, policy or political uncertainty hasn't disappeared in the eyes of the investor after this conference, has it?
No, I think the outcome of the conference in not coming out with anything dramatically new and the status quo continuing was very much in line with expectations. There were concerns, however, that there would be a lot of rhetoric on topics such as radical economic transformation, white monopoly capital, land reform without land redistribution without compensation. Those did take place, but by and large the populists, the fear of populism did not manifest itself as strongly as many people anticipated. It almost seemed as if the ANC's hierarchy are very happy to carry on with the current status quo. Jeff Radebe on Saturday spoke about maintaining the NDP, National Development Plan, as the cornerstone of economic policy, as that being the official government policy. Well, if that is the case, that's not a dramatic change in any way from what we've had before.
So let's just talk about the notable recommendations or points put forward at the conference, starting with the Reserve Bank here. So we've had this recommendation that the Reserve Bank nationalize its equity base. That doesn't really change anything with regards to the independence, but when you consider those remarks in the context where calls for changing the bank's mandate was being made, then it becomes somewhat symbolic to investors, doesn't it?
It does come across as symbolic. You're quite right in saying that the idea of the independence of the Reserve Bank being compromised was ruled out of order. Very interestingly, not only by the normal people that you'd expect it, but also by the new Finance Minister, Malusi Gigaba himself, who basically joined the fray, put Treasury's name on the line to oppose the ruling made by the public prosecutor. That does provide a little bit of solace. But then one must question, well, why did the rand weaken on that news? Was it an accumulation of other factors, which I think in part it was, but it's also psychologically people felt, well, maybe we haven't heard the end of this whole Reserve Bank story despite all the denials.
Does dropping white from white monopoly capital make a difference to investors?
Well, I don't know if it makes a huge difference to investors, but I do believe that it actually, if you're talking about monopoly capital, there is cause to be concerned about its power in South Africa. I think one of the structural weaknesses of the South African economy is precisely that there is insufficient small business activity and entrepreneurship. And that's to a large extent because so much of the economy is dominated and controlled by a handful of large organizations. By the way, be they state-owned enterprises or privately owned companies. And the new youthful entrepreneurial potential growth that we are looking towards is being stifled by that and being nipped in the bud.
Yeah. You mentioned land expropriation. There were some suggestions that perhaps a referendum should be held on the expropriation issue. That didn't gain any traction. But there's still a lot of uncertainty on that. No doubt we will be hearing more of land as we head up to December, wouldn't we?
Yes, I think we will hear more about land expropriation. And according to Enoch Ngondwana, when he presented the economic outcomes, he said, well, there was discussion of both land with expropriation and land without expropriation, and it was agreed that land expropriation without compensation, was still on the cards so long as it didn't conflict with the tenets of the Constitution. What exactly that is meant to mean, one isn't sure. But again, it was an attempt to try and appease both sides of the spectrum. In the same way as with the Reserve Bank discussion, my own feeling about calling into question the private ownership of the Reserve Bank was really mainly a sop to the populists to say, yeah, I know we say we're not keen on compromising the independence, but look, we'll compromise in the sense maybe we don't need private shareholders at the Reserve Bank, which from a practical point of view actually won't make very much difference whatsoever.
One thing that caught my eye was grants and the age number moving up to 21 years old. I mean, one gets a little bit concerned when you consider the fiscus and how much of an impact it will have on that. What do you make of it?
You know, that idea, again, has been on the cards. I think it was on the cards 5 years ago. At that time, they were talking about lifting the age for grants to 23, not 21. The fact is that it would basically raise the cost of the child support grant by about 20%. Where is that money going to come from? Well, it's certainly not going to come from free education, because, you know, we're trying to have NHI, we're trying to have free education, we're trying to aspire to spreading out the distribution of social grants. Where is all this money going to come from? That is never being addressed. And so I think what we are left with is the same old uncertainties that have prevailed for a long period of time, which, but at the same time, there was nothing disastrous about what came out of the policy conference, and maybe we should be grateful for that.
Dr. Azar Jammine from Econometrics, thanks indeed for coming in.
Pleasure.